Hey everybody, it's a new week and time again for another Papertrey Ink Make It Monday challenge. This is Betsy Vellum and I will be your host this week. Quite a while back I made this card using the Year of Flowers Violet set, and I had a few requests to show you how I made and colored the vellum flowers on this card. So this week I pulled out my Morning Glories set and I used the same technique, and I'm going to show you how I did it. So let's get started. Alright, so I'm starting off here with a die cut. This is the Year of Flowers Morning Glories, and I die cut it from Papertrey's Vellum cardstock, which is a little bit heavier than your typical vellum. Alright, so it kind of tends to curl, so I'm just going to bend it back so that when I try to line up my stamp it doesn't give me problems. I have a homemade embossing buddy here, which I like to rub over anything before I do any heat embossing. Keeps those extra embossing particles from sticking where they shouldn't. Now I'm going to stamp the Morning Glories flower image onto the die cut using some Versamark ink. And I'm just going to bend a little more. My edges are curling up a little bit, and that kind of gives me problems. The Year of Flowers dies don't have very much of a border because they're so intricate. It is pretty much the same size as the stamps, so they're a little trickier to line up than some of the other stamps and die combinations. So you just got to be really careful and make sure that you have all of those little points lined up really well. And just take your time. Alright, so it's good. Stamp that right on there. Make sure I get a good impression. Alright, and then I'm going to go ahead and heat emboss that with some white embossing powder. Kind of tricky here. The image goes all the way to the edge, so I gotta look for a good spot to pick that up without smudging my image. Just shake off the excess, and then I'm going to go ahead and heat this up. Alright, so I finished heating and the embossing is complete. The heat kind of tends to curl the image a little bit, so you can just bend it and reshape it if you need to. Alright, so now we're going to start the coloring, and I'm going to use various shades of ink. For the pink flowers I'm going to use Hibiscus Burst and Raspberry Fizz. It's kind of a lighter and darker shade of pink, and I'm just going to be coloring with a Q-tip. Here I'm going to just load up some ink onto the Q-tip by putting it right in my ink pad, and then I'm just going to go around and fill in the flowers with the Q-tip. And I'm going to take this as the lighter shade of pink, this is the Hibiscus Burst, and I'm just going to pretty much shade the entire flower. And then we'll go in a little bit with the darker pink and add some darker shaded areas. And the embossing, the white embossing, will kind of resist that ink and it won't stick to the embossing powder. So your white embossed lines will stay nice and crisp. We'll wipe off the excess ink here in a little bit when we're finished with our coloring, just by using a paper towel. So for now I'm just going to keep on filling in the flowers that I want to be pink. Alright, so I'm going to do those three in pink, and then I'm going to go here and I'm going to take my Raspberry Fizz, which is just a darker shade of pink, and I'm going to go in here in kind of the throat area of the flower. I'm going to add some shading. And then kind of down here where the upper petals would kind of cast a shadow on the lower portion of the flower, I'm going to add some darker coloring in there too. I'll just kind of follow here the veins or the lines on the flower and go ahead and add some more shading. And then the same thing on this third flower. Alright, so that is all there is to the pink flowers, and we're going to go in later when we're done with all of the inking with the Q-tip. I'm going to go in later and add a little bit more detail with some colored pens. So for right now I'm going to move on to a couple of shades of green to do the leaves. I'm using Simply Chartreuse for the lighter green and Ripe Avocado to add some shading here in a little bit. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the pink. I'm going to take my lighter shade of green and pretty much fill in the entire leaf area. Alright, now I'm going to move on to my Ripe Avocado ink, just a darker shade, and I'm going to just follow along the veins of the leaves and add that darker green shading right in there along the veins. And again, don't worry about getting it on the embossed portions because that will wipe right off in a minute here when we're finished. Alright, so that finishes up the green, and then we're going to move on to a couple shades of purple to do the one last flower in the center. I'm using Winter Wisteria as my lighter shade of purple, and then Royal Velvet. I'll go back in and do a little shading with the Royal Velvet. You can see how I'm just kind of brushing the Q-tip across my ink pad, just picking up some of that color. And you can see here too, I've taken a new Q-tip, obviously, every time I've changed colors. So I have one Q-tip per color. So I've used my pinks, my greens, and my lavenders. So just have a little stash of Q-tips in your craft room, which you probably already do anyway. They're kind of handy for all sorts of things. Alright, so our inking is finished. I'm going to take a paper towel. This is just a dry paper towel, and I'm going to brush over the colored image, and you can see where it's just picking up any of the ink that's on the embossed portion. It just wipes that clean and makes it nice and crisp and bright. Alright, so now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to add some details with some pens. I have three colors here, a purple, a green, and a pink, same colors as our inks, and I have kind of some various pens here. These are just whatever was in my pen bucket. One's a Sharpie, and a couple of these are Zigs. Kind of just a real nice fine tip pen. And I'm going to go in and add kind of some vein details, almost you know how flowers have that veining in there. I'm just going to go ahead and add that. You can see how I'm just doing real light, quick pen strokes, following the contour of the petals. I start in the center and just pull it outward. Don't overthink it, just do it kind of quickly. It'll look more natural. If you think about it too hard, it looks forced. And you can add as much or as little as you'd like. And you can kind of see how I'm coloring off onto the scrap paper as I go along. This pen seems to sort of pick up the ink as I'm going along, and seems like if I just do a little scribble on some scrap paper, that kind of clears that out of there. And you also want to be careful when you're doing the pen not to get it onto the embossed area. It doesn't wipe off like the ink does. It kind of tends to stick to the embossing, and you'll get some colored areas on your embossing. So just try to avoid getting that pen onto that white embossed portion. Okay, so that's finished with the pink. I'm going to go ahead and now finish the leaves. I have my green pen here. This is the only green pen I had in my stash, and I was not crazy about the color match. It's definitely a different shade of green, but I'll show you how you can make that work. I'm going to just follow my leaves here and follow the contours of the veins, just adding that pen shading right, kind of concentrating it along that center vein line and pulling outward. Alright, it's a very bright green, so what I'm going to go do now, after I have that finished, is I'm going to go back in with my lighter shade of green ink and Q-tip again, and just go over it very lightly, kind of blending that in, taking away a little bit of that bright grassy green. I think that just helps tone it down just a little bit. And I'll brush over it with my paper towel again just to take off any ink that it might have gotten onto my embossed area. And that, alright, and that is our beautiful colored vellum flower. Now we're going to put our card together. I have a hexagon cover plate die cut here, which I cut from Stamper Select white cardstock, and one of the things I love about vellum, obviously, is that it's translucent, and so I want to take advantage of that and use that to its fullest on our card front here. So I'm going to use the hexagon cover plate just as the front of our card. So what I'm doing is I'm going to put some very narrow strips of the foam tape right along some of the edges of the hexagons, because I'm going to adhere our colored flower cluster up to the upper left corner here. And the reason I'm trying to make sure that my foam is just on the cardstock piece is because I'm not going to be putting any backing behind this. This is going to be the front of our card, and I don't want those foam pieces to overhang, otherwise the card front will stick to the inside of the card. And then I have another small flower. I prepared this before the video. I did this in the same way that I just showed you, colored it in the same manner. And I'm going to put this one on the lower right corner. Again, I'm just going to add a few pieces of foam tape, and actually I'm going to move this little piece here over to that side edge. It has a little more thickness to it. It's a little easier to work with. So I'm just going to put a piece on the vertical edge there, and then I'll put another little one down across the bottom. And we'll just adhere that little flower cluster right to the bottom lower right corner. Okay, so now we're going to do our sentiment, and this is a Bountiful Banner die cut, also again from white cardstock, and I have a happy birthday sentiment, which is from Bountiful Banner stamp set as well, and I'm just going to go ahead and stamp that onto the banner die cut. And my favorite thing to do with these banners is just to give them a little life by bending along that the end there and kind of curving it in the center. And then I'll put a little bit of adhesive on both ends of the banner, and I'll just adhere that right to the front. I'm going to tuck the edge, the left side under the flower cluster, and that side under that little flower bloom. And I just have to hold it just for a second until that glue adheres. Alright, there is our card front. Now I'm going to show you the little trick for how to to use the cover plate die as the front of your card. Alright, I have a 5.5 by about 5-inch piece of winter wisteria cardstock, and I have it scored at the 4.25 inch mark, and you can see how I have about 3/4 of an inch excess fold over here. I do that because it's a little bit easier to fold than trying to fold a very narrow edge. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim that down so that I have a very narrow little edge here. And that is going to get adhered to the cover plate die cut. I'm going to use my bone folder just to fold that nice and flat. And then I'm going to put a little bit of adhesive right along that edge. I'm using a liquid adhesive, but if you have the really narrow 1/8 inch score tape, that would work really well also. Alright, and then that is going to get adhered to the cover plate. And you can see where that little edge is going to match up with that solid strip across the top of the cover plate die. I could have been a little more generous with the fold over edge that I left here. I cut it a little narrow, so it's giving me a little bit, so it's a little bit trickier, but there you go. You can see the inside, nice and neat. We don't have any adhesive showing because we were very careful to make sure that that was on the solid pieces of our hexagons. All right. So there you go, as our finished card, and it's kind of a fun technique, really beautiful way to make vellum flowers using supplies you probably already have in your craft room. So thanks for joining me. This has been Betsy Vellum for Papertrey Inc.'s Make It Monday. Have a great week, everybody.